My wife wanted to sell my father's country house to buy an apartment for her sister. My wife said, she's pregnant now, and she needs her own place. What about my father? I asked. What about him? She replied. I secretly sold it. 2 weeks later, my wife's sister broke in there, not knowing the buyer was. Let me tell you something about grief. It hits you in the weirdest damn places. Like when you're standing in the cereal aisle at Target, staring at Lucky Charms, and suddenly you remember how your old man used to sneak bowls of that sugary garbage at midnight when mom wasn't looking. Yeah, that's where I was 2 years ago when the reality finally smacked me upside the head. Randall Marks was gone, and I was stuck here dealing with his mess. My name's Julian Marks, and at 34, I'm supposedly a grown-ass man who should have his life figured out. Spoiler alert, I don't. But hey, at least I'm honest about it, which is more than I can say for most people in this godforsaken suburban nightmare I call home. When Dad kicked the bucket. And yeah, I know that sounds harsh, but sugarcoating death doesn't make it taste any better. He didn't leave me much. No secret fortune hidden in coffee cans, no vintage car collection, no mysterious safety deposit box filled with gold coins and family secrets. Nope. What I got was something way more complicated. His old country house tucked away in Pine Hollow, about an hour's drive from civilization. Now, before you start picturing some grand estate with white columns and sprawling gardens, let me set the record straight. This place wasn't going to be featured in Southern living anytime soon. It was a modest little cabin that Dad built with his own 2 hands back in the 80s, when he still believed in the American dream and thought manual labor was somehow noble. The guy spent every weekend for 3 years hammering, sawing, and cursing his way through what should have been a simple construction project. I remember being maybe 10 years old, standing there in my oversized work gloves, holding a flashlight while Dad struggled with some piece of plumbing that clearly had a personal vendetta against him. Jules, he'd say, wiping sweat from his forehead, someday this place is going to mean something to you. Mark my words. And you know what? The stubborn bastard was right. The house itself wasn't much to look at: 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen that had seen better decades, and a living room with a stone fireplace that Dad was particularly proud of. He'd built that fireplace brick by brick, and every time we visited, he'd point it out like he'd just discovered fire. Look at that craftsmanship, Jules. They don't make 'em like this anymore. He wasn't wrong about that either. But here's the thing about Pine Hollow. It was peaceful in a way that made your soul exhale. Surrounded by old-growth pines that whispered secrets when the wind picked up, with a little creek running through the back of the property that sounded like nature's own white noise machine. No traffic, no neighbors blasting their music at 2 in the morning, no Karen from down the street complaining about your grass being a 1/4 inch too long. Just quiet. Real, honest-to-God quiet. Dad would take me up there every other weekend when I was a kid, especially after the divorce. Mom got the house, the car, and most of his dignity, but somehow she couldn't touch Pine Hollow. It was his sanctuary, his middle finger to a world that had chewed him up and spit him out. We'd fish in that creek, even though we never caught anything bigger than my thumb. We'd sit on the porch and talk about everything and nothing. He'd drink his Budweiser, I'd have my Mountain Dew, and we'd solve all the world's problems before bedtime. After I got married, the visits became less frequent. Bianca, that's my wife, or was my wife, depending on when you're reading this story, wasn't exactly what you'd call outdoorsy. She was more of a spa weekend in the city kind of woman, which should have been my first red flag. But love makes you stupid in ways that should probably be illegal. It's just a useless pile of wood in the woods, she'd say whenever I mentioned the place. What's the point of having a house you never use? And maybe she had a point, practically speaking. But some things aren't about practicality. Some things are about holding onto the last piece of someone you loved, even if that piece happens to be a slightly crooked cabin with questionable electrical wiring. I never planned to live there full time. Hell, I wasn't even sure I wanted to keep it at first. The property taxes weren't cheap, and maintaining a place you visit maybe 6 times a year is like bleeding money through a rusty pipe. But every time I thought about selling it, I'd remember Dad's voice. Someday this place is going to mean something to you. So I kept it. Quietly. Safely. Like a secret I was protecting from the world. I drive up there maybe once a month, sometimes just to sit on the porch and remember what silence sounded like. I check the pipes, make sure nobody had broken in, maybe do some light maintenance. Nothing fancy. I'm not exactly Mr. Fix-It, but enough to keep the place from falling apart completely. Bianca tolerated these trips, barely. She'd roll her eyes when I'd announce I was heading up to Pine Hollow for the weekend. Say hi to the squirrels for me, she'd say with that special brand of sarcasm that wives perfect after years of marriage. But she never tried to stop me, and I never tried to make her understand. Looking back now, maybe that should have been another red flag. When someone can't understand why you'd want to preserve your father's memory, when they can't see the value in something that doesn't have a price tag attached to it. Well, that says something about their character, doesn't it? But I'm getting ahead of myself. Back then, I thought we were just different people with different priorities. I thought marriage was about compromise, about finding middle ground between his and hers towels, and whose turn it was to take out the trash. I had no idea that my peaceful little cabin in Pine Hollow was about to become ground zero for the biggest clusterfuck of my adult life. All because of one conversation on a Sunday morning that would change everything. Sunday mornings in the Marks household were supposed to be sacred. You know, that whole lazy weekend vibe where you shuffle around in your pajamas, drink coffee that's actually good instead of the swill they serve at work, and pretend you're going to be productive, while secretly planning to binge-watch Netflix until your brain turns to mush. It was the one time of the week when Bianca and I could almost pretend we still liked each other. But this particular Sunday morning felt different from the moment I walked into the kitchen. There was something in the air, call it tension, call it impending doom, call it whatever you want, but I could feel it like humidity before a thunderstorm. Bianca was sitting at our little breakfast table, the one we'd bought at IKEA during our newlywed phase, when we thought Swedish furniture was the height of sophistication. She had that look on her face, the one that meant she'd been plotting something while I was still drooling on my pillow. She was stirring her coffee like it had personally offended her entire family tree. Around and around went that little silver spoon, creating a tiny whirlpool that seemed to mirror the sinking feeling in my gut. I've been married long enough to know that when your wife is aggressively stirring her coffee at 8 in the morning, you're about to hear something you don't want to hear. "Morning, babe," I said, trying to keep things light. I grabbed my favorite mug, the one with the faded logo from some craft brewery we'd visited on our honeymoon, and poured myself what I hoped would be liquid courage. The coffee was good, which somehow made what was coming feel even worse. "Julian," she began, and right there I knew I was screwed. When your wife uses your full name instead of some cutesy pet name, or just launching straight into conversation, you're about to get hit with something big. It's like when your mom used your first and middle name as a kid, nothing good ever followed that tone. She took a sip of her coffee, made a face like it was battery acid, and continued stirring. "Maya's pregnant. Now, Maya is Bianca's little sister, 27 years old, and about as responsible as a golden retriever with ADHD. Sweet girl, don't get me wrong, but she had this talent for making spectacularly bad life decisions and then looking shocked when they blew up in her face. Like the time she decided to become a vegan chef despite being allergic to most vegetables, or when she dated that guy who collected mannequins and claimed they talked to him. Congratulations to Maya," I said carefully, because Maya being pregnant wasn't necessarily my problem yet, but I could feel the other shoe hovering above my head, ready to drop like a piano in a cartoon. "She needs a place to live," Bianca continued, still stirring that damn coffee. At this point, she'd created enough centrifugal force to power a small generator. "You know that country house of your dad's? It would be perfect for her and Logan." Logan. Jesus Christ, Logan. Maya's new husband was a walking stereotype of every wannabe musician who'd ever picked up a guitar and decided that made him an artist. Skinny as a fence post, with those stupid gauges in his ears and a collection of vintage band t-shirts that probably cost more than my car payment. He played in some band called Existential Crisis or Philosophical Breakdown, or some other pretentious bullshit that sounded like they discovered a thesaurus and decided to weaponize it. The guy had the work ethic of a sloth on sedatives and the financial sense of a toddler in a candy store. But sure, let's give him access to my dad's house. What could possibly go wrong? "Perfect how?" I asked, though I was pretty sure I didn't want to know the answer. Bianca finally looked up from her coffee, and I saw something in her eyes that made my stomach drop. It wasn't the look of someone making a suggestion. It was the look of someone who'd already made a decision and was just waiting for me to get with the program. "We could sell the place," she said, like she was suggesting we change the channel. Use the money as a down payment for an apartment for her and the baby. Maya's got nothing, Julian. She's scared, she's broke, and Logan's not exactly rolling in cash from his music career. The air quotes she made around music career were so sarcastic they could have been seen from space. I felt like someone had just punched me in the chest. Sell Dad's house. The place he'd built with his own hands. The place where we'd spent countless weekends fishing and talking and just being father and son. The last tangible piece of him I had left. What about my father's memory? I asked, trying to keep my voice level. What about what he wanted? Bianca's expression didn't change. She just kept looking at me with those cold, calculating eyes, like I was a math problem she was trying to solve. What about him? She said, and the casual way she dismissed my father's legacy made something dark and angry twist in my chest. What about him? I repeated, unable to believe what I'd just heard. Bianca, that house is all I have left of my dad. It's not just some asset we can liquidate whenever your family needs a bailout. She sighed like I was being unreasonable, like I was some kind of selfish monster for wanting to hold on to my father's memory. Julian, be practical. When was the last time you even went up there? Maya actually needs something. You're just hoarding a piece of property for sentimental reasons. Sentimental reasons. Like love and memory and respect for the dead were just silly emotions that got in the way of good business sense. Like the years Dad spent building that place, the weekends we'd shared there, the promise I'd made to myself to protect what he'd left me. Like all of that was just sentimental bullshit that didn't matter in the real world. It's not happening, I said, standing up from the table. Find another solution for Maya's problems. Bianca's smile was cold as winter. We'll see about that. At the time, I thought it was just an empty threat, the kind of thing people say when they're pissed off and trying to get the last word. I figured she'd cool down. Maybe we'd have another conversation about it later. Maybe we'd find some other way to help Maya that didn't involve destroying the last piece of my father I had left. I had no idea that my wife had already moved way past the suggestion phase and was well into the implementation stage of her plan. You know that feeling when you're watching a horror movie and the main character is about to open the door that everyone in the theater is screaming at them not to open? Yeah, well, I was living that horror movie, except I was too stupid to realize I was the main character until it was almost too late. After our little Sunday morning chat about Maya's situation, I figured Bianca would cool off and we'd eventually find some reasonable solution that didn't involve selling my father's house. Maybe we could help Maya and Logan find a cheap apartment, or better yet, maybe Logan could get off his skinny ass and find a real job that paid actual money instead of exposure and the occasional $20 tip from drunk college kids. I went about my week like a normal human being, blissfully unaware that my wife had already shifted into full-blown scheming mode. I should have known something was up when she stopped bringing up the subject entirely. When Bianca wanted something and you said no, she usually turned into a human bulldozer, wearing you down with constant nagging until you gave in just to make the noise stop. The fact that she went radio silent on the Maya situation should have been a red flag the size of Texas. But no, I was living in my little bubble of denial, thinking I'd actually won an argument for once in my married life. I even felt a tiny bit proud of myself for standing up to her. Look at me, Julian Marks, finally growing a backbone at the ripe old age of 34. Better late than never, right? Wrong. So fucking wrong. It was Wednesday afternoon when my world came crashing down like a house of cards in a hurricane. I was sitting in my cubicle at work, pretending to care about quarterly reports while actually browsing Reddit, when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Uncle Greg's name, which was weird because Greg usually only called on holidays or when someone in the family died. "Hey, Jules," Greg said, and I could hear something strange in his voice. Like he was trying to figure out how to tell me I had toilet paper stuck to my shoe without embarrassing me. "I just saw your dad's place listed online. Thought you should know." For a second, my brain just stopped processing information. It was like someone had pulled the plug on my mental computer, and I was stuck staring at a blue screen of death. "What do you mean, listed online?" I asked, even though deep down I already knew exactly what he meant. My stomach was doing gymnastics routines that would have impressed the Olympic judges. "Real estate website," Greg said. "Beautiful photos, too. Looks like whoever's selling it really knows how to market a property. Got a nice description talking about the peaceful setting and the craftsmanship. Even mentions how Randall built it himself." I felt like someone had reached into my chest, and started squeezing my heart with a vice grip. Greg, I didn't list that house. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Jules, you might want to check this out yourself. I'm looking at it right now, and it definitely says it's for sale. I hung up on poor Greg without even saying goodbye and immediately pulled up the real estate website on my computer. And there it was, in all its digital glory, my father's house, complete with professional photographs that made the place look like something out of a country living magazine. Someone had clearly hired a real photographer who knew what they were doing. The pictures showed the house from every flattering angle, capturing the way the morning light filtered through the pine trees and made the whole property look like some kind of rustic paradise. There was even a shot of the stone fireplace Dad was so proud of, with the description noting the handcrafted stonework by the original owner. My hands were shaking as I scrolled through the listing. The description was spot-on perfect, hitting all the right notes about peaceful country living and the escape from urban stress. Whoever wrote it knew exactly how to appeal to city folks looking for their own little slice of heaven. It was the kind of marketing copy that would have made Dad proud if it wasn't being used to sell his life's work without his son's permission. And then I saw it. The contact information. A phone number I recognized immediately because I'd been paying the bill for it for the past 6 years. Bianca's cell phone. I stared at that number for a full minute, trying to process what I was seeing. My wife, my own goddamn wife, had taken professional photos of my father's house, written up a beautiful listing, and put it on the market without saying a single word to me about it. After I'd explicitly told her no. After she'd looked me in the eye and heard me explain why that house meant everything to me. The betrayal hit me like a freight train loaded with broken dreams and shattered trust. This wasn't just disrespect. This was a full-scale invasion of everything I held sacred. This was my wife deciding that my feelings, my father's memory, and my explicit refusal didn't matter one tiny bit in the face of her family's needs. I called her immediately, my fingers fumbling with the phone because my hands were shaking so badly. She answered on the second ring, bright and cheerful like she didn't have a care in the world. "Hey, babe. What's up?" "Bianca," I said, and my voice sounded weird and hollow, like it was coming from somewhere far away. "We need to talk. Now. I'm at lunch with Maya. Can it wait?" "No, it fucking can't wait. I'm coming home. Be there." I left work early, telling my boss I had a family emergency, which was technically true if you counted discovering your wife was a lying, scheming snake as a family emergency. The drive home felt like it took forever and no time at all, my mind racing between disbelief and rage. When I walked into our house, Bianca was sitting on the couch like nothing had happened, scrolling through her phone with that same casual attitude she'd had while stirring her coffee on Sunday morning. "You listed my father's house," I said. Not a question, a statement. She didn't even look up from her phone. "You never use it. Maya needs a future. You're being selfish." The casual way she said it, like she was discussing the weather, made something snap inside my chest. Selfish? I'm being selfish for wanting to keep the last thing my father left me. Finally, she looked up, and that's when I saw the smirk. That tiny, satisfied little smile that told me everything I needed to know about who I'd married and how little she thought of me. "Besides," she said, "I already have all the paperwork. I can sign for you. Forge my signature." She was planning to forge my signature to steal my father's house and sell it out from under me. My own wife was planning to commit fraud to get what she wanted. That's when I realized I wasn't in a marriage anymore. I was in a war zone, and I'd been fighting with both hands tied behind my back while my opponent had been loading up on weapons and ammunition. The gloves were about to come off. There's this moment in every man's life when he realizes he's been playing checkers while everyone else has been playing chess. For me, that moment was sitting in my living room, staring at my wife's smug face as she casually mentioned forging my signature like she was talking about picking up groceries. I felt like I couldn't breathe. You know that sensation when you're underwater and you suddenly realize you're deeper than you thought, and the surface is way farther away than it should be? That's what betrayal feels like drowning in your own life while the person who's supposed to love you is holding your head underwater. But here's the thing about rock bottom. It gives you a solid place to push off from. I stood there in my own living room, looking at this woman I'd shared a bed with for 6 years, this woman who knew how much my father meant to me, who'd seen me cry at his funeral, who'd held my hand while I struggled through the grief of losing the only parent who'd ever given a damn about me. and she was planning to steal the last piece of him I had left. The rage was there, burning hot and bright in my chest, begging me to start screaming, to call her every name in the book, to throw something at the wall just to hear it break. But underneath that rage was something colder, something smarter, something that whispered, "Don't let her see you coming." You see, Bianca had made one crucial mistake. She'd shown me her cards too early. She was so confident in her little scheme, so sure that I was just going to roll over and take whatever she dished out, that she'd gotten sloppy. She'd revealed her entire plan while thinking she'd already won. But the game wasn't over. Hell, the game was just getting started. "You know what, Bianca?" I said, keeping my voice as calm as a monk in meditation. "You're absolutely right." She blinked, clearly not expecting that response. The smirk faltered just a little. "I am. Yeah, I never use the house. Maya does need help. And I am being selfish." I shrugged like I was admitting I'd forgotten to take out the trash. "You've convinced me." Now she looked confused, like I'd just started speaking Mandarin. Really? In fact, you've inspired me to take action." I pulled out my phone and started scrolling through my contacts. I'm going to call Paula right now and get this whole thing sorted out. Paula Martinez had been my dad's real estate agent when he bought the land for the house, and she'd stayed in touch over the years. More than that, she'd been one of Dad's closest friends, the kind of person who still sent me Christmas cards with handwritten notes asking how I was doing. If anyone would understand the importance of handling this situation properly, it was Paula. Bianca was watching me like I'd grown a second head. You're really going to sell it?" "Absolutely," I said, hitting Paula's number. "I want to make sure everything is done legally and above board. No cutting corners, no forged signatures, no shady business. Just a clean, legitimate sale." The phone rang twice before Paula's familiar voice came on the line. "Julian, how are you, sweetheart?" "Hey, Paula. I'm good, thanks. Listen, I need to ask you for a favor. A big one." "Of course, honey. What can I do for you?" I looked directly at Bianca while I spoke, keeping my voice perfectly level and reasonable. "I want to sell my father's house. Fast. Quietly. Can you help me?" There was a pause on the other end. "The Pine Hollow place? Julian, are you sure about this? I know how much that property meant to your dad." "I'm sure," I said, still maintaining eye contact with my wife, who was starting to look like she'd bitten into a lemon. "Before someone else tries to take it from me." "Well, if you're certain, I actually might have a buyer in mind. Let me make some calls." "That would be perfect. And Paula, I'm willing to shave $15,000 off whatever you think it's worth if it means we can close quickly." $15,000? Julian, that's a lot of money to leave on the table. Consider it a convenience fee. I need this done fast, and I need it done right. "Okay, sweetheart. Let me see what I can do. I'll call you back within the hour." I hung up and looked at Bianca, who was staring at me like I'd just performed magic tricks with fire. There. Problem solved. Maya will get her money. You'll get what you want. And I'll get to make sure my father's house goes to someone who'll actually appreciate it instead of some random buyer who just wants a vacation home. But I already had it listed," she stammered. "Yeah, illegally. Without my permission. Using forged documents." I smiled at her, the kind of smile you give someone when you're explaining something very simple to someone very stupid. This way, everything's legitimate. No fraud charges, no legal complications, no messy court battles. Just a clean sale between consenting adults. Bianca's mouth was opening and closing like a fish out of water. She'd been so focused on her sneaky little plan that she hadn't considered the possibility that I might just sell the house myself. Legally. On my own terms. "Of course," I continued. "You'll need to take down that illegal listing immediately. Can't have two different agents trying to sell the same property. That would be fraud, and we wouldn't want that." 20 minutes later, Paula called back. Her voice was excited, almost breathless. "Julian, you're not going to believe this. I called Harvey Stone. You remember Officer Stone from the sheriff's department?" I did remember Harvey. He'd been one of the cops who'd responded when Dad had that break-in attempt a few years back. Stand-up guy, close to retirement, the kind of old-school cop who still believed in protecting and serving instead of just writing tickets. "Harvey's been looking for a place just like your dad's house," Paula continued. "Somewhere quiet to retire to, away from all the craziness. He's got cash ready, and he can close by the end of the week if you're serious about this." "How much cash?" I asked. Paula named a figure that was actually higher than what Bianca had listed the house for, even after my $15,000 discount. Apparently, my wife wasn't as good at real estate as she thought she was. "Tell Harvey we have a deal," I said. "I'll come by your office tomorrow to sign the papers." When I hung up, Bianca was staring at me like I'd just grown horns in a tail. "You actually sold it. To a cop." "Yep. To a good man who'll take care of the place and respect what it represents." I stood up and headed toward the door. "Now if you'll excuse me, I need to go take down your illegal listing before Harvey finds out someone else was trying to sell his new house." I was almost to the door when Bianca found her voice again. "Julian, wait. What about Maya? What about the money?" I turned back to look at her, and for the first time in our entire marriage, I saw something that looked like fear in her eyes. "What about them?" "The money from the sale. Maya needs that money." I smiled again, the same patient smile I'd been practicing all afternoon. "Oh, the money's going to be safely deposited in my personal account. You know, the account that only has my name on it. The account you can't touch." "But Maya should have thought about that before she married a deadbeat musician. And you should have thought about it before you decided to commit fraud." I walked out of the house and didn't look back. I had a phone call to make to the real estate website, and after that, I had some serious planning to do. Because if Bianca thought this was over, she was about to learn just how wrong she could be. The war had officially begun, and I'd just fired the first shot. You know what they say about the best laid plans of mice and men? Well, sometimes the mice get lucky and the men are too busy plotting their own destruction to notice what's happening right under their noses. That's exactly what happened over the next 3 days. While Bianca was probably sitting at home trying to figure out how her foolproof scheme had suddenly turned into my strategic advantage. I didn't tell her a damn thing about the sale process. Why would I? She'd already shown me exactly how much my trust was worth to her, approximately jack shit. So instead of keeping her in the loop like a loving husband might do, I treated her like what she'd proven herself to be, the enemy. Wednesday morning, I met Paula at her office in downtown. The place hadn't changed much since Dad used to drag me there as a kid. Same beige carpet that had seen better decades. Same motivational posters about home is where the heart is. Same smell of coffee and that industrial air freshener they use in places where people sign important documents. But this time felt different. This time, I wasn't some grieving son trying to figure out what to do with his inheritance. This time, I was a man with a mission. "Julian, honey, are you absolutely sure about this?" Paula asked for what had to be the 10th time since I'd called her. She was sitting across from me at her desk, a stack of papers between us like a peace treaty waiting to be signed. "I know your daddy would want you to be happy, but that house was his pride and joy." "Paula, let me ask you something," I said, leaning back in the uncomfortable office chair. "If Dad knew that someone was trying to steal his house through fraud and forgery, what do you think he'd want me to do? Let it happen, or make sure it went to someone who'd actually respect what he built?" Paula's expression softened. She'd known my dad for over 20 years, had been there when he first started talking about building his dream house, had even attended his funeral and cried like she'd lost a brother. She understood better than most people what that place represented. "When you put it that way," she said, "I think Randall would be proud of you for protecting his legacy. Harvey Stone is good people, Julian. Your dad would have liked him." And that's when Paula told me something that made this whole crazy situation feel like fate instead of just revenge. Apparently, Harvey had been driving past the property for months during his patrol routes, admiring the craftsmanship and the peaceful setting. He'd even mentioned to Paula once that if the place ever went up for sale, he'd be interested in making an offer. "He's been saving up for years," Paula explained, living in that tiny apartment above the hardware store, putting every extra penny aside for his retirement dream. When I called him yesterday, he said it felt like Christmas morning. So not only was I outsmarting my scheming wife, I was also making some old cop's retirement dreams come true. If that's not what they call a win-win situation, I don't know what is. The paperwork was surprisingly straightforward. Cash sales usually are, especially when both parties are motivated to close quickly. Harvey had already been pre-approved for financing, but he decided to pay cash to make the deal more attractive. Smart move on his part, because I probably would have taken his offer even if it had been lower than what Bianca's mysterious buyer might have paid. Thursday afternoon, I met Harvey at the property for a final walkthrough. I'd been a little nervous about this part, wondering if he'd see the place the same way Dad and I had. or if he'd just view it as a decent investment in a nice location. Harvey Stone turned out to be exactly the kind of guy you'd want to inherit your father's legacy. Mid-50s, built like someone who'd spent his career chasing down bad guys and lifting weights to work off the stress. He had these sharp blue eyes that missed nothing and calloused hands that spoke of someone who knew his way around manual labor. But more than that, he had this quiet respect for the place that reminded me of Dad. "Your father built this himself?" he asked, running his hand along the stone fireplace that Dad had been so proud of. "Every brick," I said. "Took him 3 years, working weekends and vacations." Harvey nodded appreciatively. "You can tell. This isn't some contractor special thrown up to flip for profit. This is a man's life work." We walked around the property for about an hour, Harvey asking questions about the well, the septic system, the electrical work, practical stuff that showed he was planning to actually live here, not just use it as a weekend getaway. He even asked about the best spots for fishing in the creek, which would have made Dad grin from ear to ear. "I want you to know," Harvey said as we wrapped up the walkthrough, "I'm not planning to change much. Maybe update some of the plumbing, fix a few loose boards on the deck, but the character of the place, that's staying exactly as it is." Right then and there, I knew I was making the right decision. This wasn't just about screwing over Bianca anymore. This was about making sure Dad's house went to someone who understood what it represented. Friday morning, we met at Paula's office to sign the final papers. Harvey showed up with a cashier's check that made my eyes water, not because it was an astronomical amount, but because it was real, legitimate money that was about to solve a lot of my problems while simultaneously protecting something I loved. The signing took maybe 20 minutes. Harvey was one of those old-school guys who actually read every page before putting his signature on it, which I respected the hell out of. Too many people just sign wherever you tell them to sign, and then act surprised when they get screwed over later. "Congratulations, Mr. Stone," Paula said, handing over the keys. "You're now the proud owner of one of the finest hand-built homes in Pine Hollow." Harvey shook my hand with a grip that could crack walnuts. "Thank you, Julian. I promise you, this place is going to be loved and respected." And just like that, it was done. The house that Dad built with his own hands, the house where we'd spent countless weekends making memories, the house that Bianca had tried to steal from me. It now belonged to Harvey Stone, a man who would honor its history while making new memories of his own. I walked out of Paula's office with a cashier's check in my pocket and a feeling of satisfaction I hadn't experienced in years. The money went straight into my personal account, the one that only had my name on it, the one that Bianca couldn't touch even if she hired the best divorce lawyer in the state. I'd protected Dad's legacy, made a good man's retirement dreams come true, and completely outmaneuvered my wife's fraudulent scheme. Not bad for a week's work. But the best part? Bianca still had no idea what had just happened. There's something beautiful about watching a house of cards collapse, especially when you're the one who's been carefully removing the bottom cards while everyone else thinks the structure is still solid. For 2 whole weeks after the sale, I got to sit back and watch Bianca go about her daily routine, completely oblivious to the fact that her master plan had been nuked from orbit. Those were probably the most peaceful 2 weeks of my marriage. Bianca was being unusually nice to me, probably thinking she'd won some kind of victory by listing the house behind my back. She'd even started cooking dinner more often, which should have been a red flag the size of a football stadium, but I was enjoying the calm before the storm too much to question it. She'd hum little songs while doing dishes, give me these satisfied smiles when she thought I wasn't looking, and even initiated sex twice, which was about twice more than we'd had in the previous 6 months. She was practically glowing with self-satisfaction, like a cat who'd just figured out how to open the tuna can all by herself. Meanwhile, I was sitting on information that was going to detonate her entire world, and I'll be damned if I wasn't enjoying every second of the anticipation. You know that feeling when you're holding 4 aces in poker and watching everyone else bet their life savings? Yeah, that was my life for 2 glorious weeks. I'd already paid off my credit card debt, put a nice chunk into savings, and even treated myself to a new laptop. Nothing crazy, but enough to remind myself that I was the one holding all the cards now. The rest of the money was sitting in my account like a security blanket, earning interest while I waited for the perfect moment to reveal my hand. That moment came on a Tuesday evening in early March. I was sitting on the couch, half watching some mindless TV show about people buying houses they couldn't afford, when I heard Bianca's car pull into the driveway. But instead of her usual quick, efficient entrance, I heard the car door slam with the kind of force that rattles windows and suggests someone is having a very bad day. The front door burst open like she was being chased by wolves, and Bianca came storming into the living room with her face the color of a fire engine and her eyes blazing with the kind of fury that makes smart men run for cover. "Julian," she screamed, and I could practically see the steam coming out of her ears. "What the fuck did you do?" I looked up from the TV with the most innocent expression I could muster, like a kid who definitely didn't eat the last cookie, but somehow has chocolate on his face. "Good evening to you too, sweetheart. How was your day? Don't you dare play dumb with me." She was standing in the middle of our living room, shaking like a chihuahua in a thunderstorm. "Maya and I drove up to Pine Hollow today to start cleaning out the house for the new buyers, and there are fucking new locks on the doors." And there it was, the moment I'd been waiting for. The glorious, beautiful moment when Bianca finally realized that her elaborate scheme had blown up in her face like a cartoon cigar. I muted the TV and gave her my full attention, the way you might watch a particularly entertaining train wreck. "New locks. That's weird. Why would there be new locks?" Her voice cracked like a teenager going through puberty. "Because it's not ours anymore, is it, Julian? Because somehow, someway, that house got sold without me knowing about it." I nodded thoughtfully, like this was the first time I was hearing about any of this. "Huh, that is strange. When did this happen?" "You tell me," she shrieked. "When did you sell your father's house behind my back?" "Oh, that," I said, snapping my fingers like I'd just remembered something minor. 2 weeks ago, maybe 3. Time flies when you're not committing fraud." The silence that followed was so profound you could have heard a mouse fart in the next county. Bianca just stood there, mouth hanging open like she was trying to catch flies, while her brain attempted to process the magnitude of what I'd just told her. "You sold your father's house?" she finally whispered, like saying it quietly would somehow make it less true. "Yep. Legally, I might add. With proper documentation, legitimate signatures, and everything." I smiled at her with the kind of warmth you usually reserve for explaining simple concepts to small children. Amazing what you can accomplish when you don't have to forge anyone's name. Her face went through about 17 different expressions in the span of 5 seconds. Shock, disbelief, rage, confusion, and what looked like the dawning realization that she'd been outplayed by someone she'd considered an easy mark. "You had no right," she finally exploded, finding her voice again. "That house was supposed to help Maya. She has nothing, Julian. Nothing. And you did? You had the right to list my property without my permission? You had the right to plan on forging my signature to steal something that belonged to me." I stood up from the couch, and for the first time in our entire relationship, I felt like I was looking down at her instead of the other way around. "That house wasn't for sale until you made it one, Bianca. But Maya needs to learn that other people's problems aren't automatically my responsibility." I cut her off. "Maya needs to learn that marrying a deadbeat musician has consequences. And you need to learn that betraying your husband's trust comes with a price." Bianca's eyes were filling with tears now, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of pure, unadulterated rage. "Who did you sell it to? Who has my sister's house?" "Your sister's house?" I laughed, and it felt good to laugh at her for once instead of with her. "Sweetheart, that was never your sister's house. That was my father's house, which became my house when he died. Maya never had any claim to it, and neither did you." "You know what I meant." "No, I know exactly what you meant. You meant that you'd already decided that house belonged to Maya, regardless of what I wanted, or what was legal, or what was right. You'd already given away something that wasn't yours to give." I walked over to where she was standing and looked her directly in the eyes. "The house went to Officer Harvey Stone, a good man who's going to retire there and take care of the place the way Dad would have wanted. He paid cash, closed quickly, and didn't require anyone to commit felonies to make the sale happen." "A cop?" Bianca's voice was barely a whisper now. "You sold it to a cop? A cop who appreciates craftsmanship and respects what that house represents. A cop who's not going to turn it into some party pad for unemployed musicians and their knocked-up wives." That's when Bianca lost what was left of her composure and started crying for real. Not the manipulative tears she'd used on me countless times before, but the ugly, snotty kind of crying that happens when someone realizes they've fucked up beyond all repair. "This isn't over," she said through her tears. "Maya still needs help. We'll figure something else out." I walked back to the couch and unmuted the TV. "Good luck with that. And Bianca? Next time you want to sell something that belongs to me, maybe ask first. You know, like married people are supposed to do." The look she gave me could have melted steel, but I was done caring about Bianca's feelings. She'd made her choice when she decided to betray me, and now she was going to live with the consequences. The war was far from over, but I just won the biggest battle. If I've learned anything from being married to Bianca, it's that some people have this amazing ability to take a bad situation and make it infinitely worse through sheer force of stupidity and entitlement. I thought our little confrontation about the house sale would be the end of it, that even she wouldn't be dumb enough to escalate things further. But I'd forgotten that I was dealing with someone who'd already proven she was willing to commit fraud to get what she wanted. I should have known she wouldn't just accept defeat and move on like a reasonable human being. That's not the Bianca way. The Bianca way is to double down on stupid decisions until they become criminal decisions, and then act shocked when everything goes to hell. For about a week after our explosive confrontation, things were relatively quiet on the home front. Bianca was giving me the silent treatment, which was honestly the best our marriage had been in months. She'd stomp around the house like a passive-aggressive hurricane, slamming cabinet doors and sighing dramatically whenever I was in the room, but at least she wasn't actively plotting my destruction. Or so I thought. The peace lasted exactly 7 days. I was sitting in my office on a Monday morning, pretending to care about some quarterly budget report that was about as exciting as watching paint dry in slow motion, when my phone rang. Paula's name popped up on the caller ID, which was weird because we'd wrapped up all the paperwork for the house sale weeks ago. "Hey, Paula," I answered, figuring she was calling to tell me about some minor paperwork hiccup or maybe just to check in. "What's up, Julian?" Her voice sounded strange, like she was trying to figure out how to tell me my dog had died. "We have a problem." Those 4 words made my stomach drop like an elevator with cut cables. In my experience, when real estate agents call you weeks after closing to say, "We have a problem," it's never something simple like a missing signature or a clerical error. "What kind of problem?" I asked, though I had a sinking feeling I already knew the answer. "Harvey called me this morning. Someone tried to break into the house last night. The alarm went off around 2 a.m., and the security company called the police. They caught it all on the security cameras." My blood turned to ice water. Harvey had mentioned during our walkthrough that he was planning to install a state-of-the-art security system. Motion sensors, door alarms, the works. Living alone in the middle of nowhere, especially as a retired cop, he wasn't taking any chances with his safety or his property. "Did they catch whoever did it?" I asked, though part of me was afraid to hear the answer. There was a long pause on Paula's end. "Julian, you're not going to like this. The cameras got a clear shot of the person trying to break in. And it was your sister-in-law, Maya." I felt like someone had just punched me in the solar plexus. Maya? Sweet, airhead, pregnant Maya had tried to break into my father's house. The same Maya who claimed she was too delicate to work a normal job, who needed constant help and support because she was fragile and overwhelmed by life. "Are you absolutely sure it was her?" I asked, hoping against hope that maybe the cameras had made a mistake, that maybe it was just some random burglar who happened to look like my sister-in-law. "Harvey knows what she looks like, Julian. He saw her at the closing when she and Bianca showed up too. Well, when they discovered the locks had been changed. He's positive it was her. Of course Bianca had brought Maya to the house that day. Probably thought they could just walk in like they owned the place, maybe start moving Maya's stuff in before anyone noticed. The new locks must have been a real wake-up call. What exactly did she do?" I asked. According to Harvey, she tried multiple windows on the ground floor, then attempted to pick the lock on the back door. When that didn't work, she tried to break the kitchen window with a rock. That's when the alarm went off and she ran. Maya, who claimed she couldn't figure out how to program a TV remote, had tried to pick a lock. Maya, who supposedly fainted at the sight of blood, had been prowling around someone else's property in the middle of the night with criminal intent. Apparently, pregnancy had given her skills I never knew she possessed. Did Harvey press charges? I asked, though I suspected I knew the answer to that too. That's the thing, Harvey's a good guy. He doesn't want to send a pregnant woman to jail over what he's calling a misunderstanding. But Julian, this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was attempted breaking and entering. Harvey's got it all on video. A misunderstanding. Right. Like Maya just happened to be in the neighborhood at 2 in the morning and accidentally tried to break into a house she thought was still mine. Like she'd gotten confused and thought she was picking wildflowers instead of trying to commit a felony. What does Harvey want to do about it? I asked. He wants to talk to you first before he decides whether to involve the police officially. He says he respects what your father built there, and he doesn't want to cause you any unnecessary drama if it can be avoided. But Julian, he's also not going to let people think they can just break into his home whenever they feel like it. I couldn't blame Harvey for that. The guy had just bought his dream retirement home, and now he was dealing with my dysfunctional in-laws treating it like community property. If I were in his shoes, I'd probably be a lot less understanding about the whole situation. I'll call him, I said. What's his number? Paula gave me Harvey's contact information and made me promise to keep her in the loop about whatever we decided to do. As soon as I hung up with her, I called Harvey directly. Officer Stone, this is Julian Marks. I heard about what happened last night, and I want to apologize. Julian, you don't need to apologize for something you didn't do, Harvey said, and his voice was calm but firm. But we do need to talk about this situation. That young lady seems to think she has some kind of claim to this property. She doesn't. She never did. But my wife convinced her that she was going to inherit the house somehow. Well, she's going to need to be convinced otherwise. I've got clear video footage of her attempting to break in. If this happens again, I'm going to have to press charges, pregnant or not. I couldn't argue with that logic. Harvey was being more than reasonable, and Maya had pushed the situation into criminal territory all by herself. What can I do to help resolve this? I asked. Have a conversation with your family. Make it clear that this property belongs to me now, and that any further attempts to access it without permission will result in arrest and prosecution. I don't want to ruin a young woman's life over this, but I also won't tolerate people treating my home like a public park. After I hung up with Harvey, I sat in my office chair for a long time, trying to process what had just happened. Maya had actually tried to break into the house. Pregnant, desperate Maya had turned into a common criminal because Bianca had filled her head with lies about inheriting property that was never hers to begin with. But here's what really got to me. I knew this wasn't Maya's idea. Maya didn't have the initiative or the planning skills to orchestrate a midnight break-in attempt. This had Bianca's fingerprints all over it, even if she'd been smart enough to send her pregnant sister to do the actual dirty work. I had to go home and confront my wife about the fact that she'd now escalated our little property dispute into actual criminal activity. And somehow, I didn't think this conversation was going to go any better than the last one. The drive home felt like a death march. I kept rehearsing what I was going to say to Bianca, how I was going to explain that her pregnant sister had just committed a felony because of the lies she'd been fed. But nothing I came up with sounded right. How do you tell your wife that she's turned her own family into criminals? Bianca was in the kitchen when I walked in, making herself a sandwich like she didn't have a care in the world. The casual normalcy of it made my blood boil. We need to talk, I said. She didn't even look up from her turkey and Swiss. About what? About your sister trying to break into Harvey's house last night. The sandwich fell out of her hands like she'd been electrocuted. What are you talking about? Maya. Security cameras. 2 a.m. Ring any bells? I pulled out my phone and showed her the text Harvey had sent with a screenshot from the footage. She tried to pick the lock, Bianca. When that didn't work, she tried to break a window. Bianca stared at the image of her sister crouched by the back door, clearly attempting to jimmy the lock. She thought it was still yours. She just wanted to look around. Bullshit. She wanted to squat there, move in, and pretend it was hers. Admit it. She's pregnant and scared. She's a criminal who committed breaking and entering because you filled her head with lies about inheriting a house that was never hers. The next day, Logan called me. Man, why'd you do that? Maya's pregnant, bro. I hung up on the wannabe rock star without saying a word. Then came the parade of Bianca's family members, all calling to tell me what a monster I was. Her parents cried on the phone about how I was endangering the baby by not giving Maya a free house. Her aunt lectured me about family obligations. Her cousin threatened to handle this personally. Maya ended up in the hospital that night, claiming stress from the harassment. Apparently, Finding out that breaking and entering is illegal was too much for her delicate constitution. That's when I said the words I'd been holding back for months. None of this is my problem anymore. You know what's funny about declaring that something isn't your problem anymore? The universe has this twisted sense of humor where it immediately tests whether you really mean it. Like some cosmic game show where the prize is your sanity and the penalty is getting dragged back into the same bullshit you just tried to escape from. After Maya's midnight crime spree and subsequent hospital dramatics, I figured things couldn't get any worse. I was wrong, of course, because when you're dealing with people who think breaking and entering is a reasonable response to not getting free real estate, there's always room for the situation to deteriorate further. Maya and Logan ended up moving in with Bianca's parents, which should have been the end of my involvement in their tragic little soap opera. Mr. and Mrs. Rodriguez had a decent-sized house in the suburbs, plenty of room for their unemployed daughter and her musician husband who thought making it big was a viable retirement plan. It wasn't my house, it wasn't my problem, and it definitely wasn't my responsibility to fix their family's financial disasters. But apparently, I was the only one who understood that basic concept. Bianca had completely lost her shit over the whole situation. She'd gone from being a manipulative schemer to being a full-blown emotional terrorist, using every guilt trip and psychological weapon in her arsenal to try to make me feel responsible for her sister's problems. According to Bianca's twisted logic, Maya's failed break-in attempt was somehow my fault for selling the house in the first place. The hospital visit was my fault for stressing out a pregnant woman, and Logan's continued unemployment was my fault for not providing them with free housing. The mental gymnastics required to reach these conclusions would have impressed Olympic judges, but I was done pretending that Bianca's delusions had any connection to reality. "You ruined everything," she told me one morning while I was trying to eat breakfast in peace. "Maya had a plan, she had hope, and you destroyed it all because you're selfish." Maya's plan was to steal my property through fraud, I replied, not looking up from my cereal. "That's not hope, that's a felony. She needed stability for the baby. Then maybe she should have thought about that before marrying a guy whose idea of a steady job is playing guitar at open mic nights." That conversation, like all our conversations during this period, ended with Bianca storming out of the room and slamming doors like a teenager having a tantrum. But this time, she didn't come back. 3 days later, she moved out completely, taking her clothes, her attitude, and her collection of self-help books about toxic relationships, which was rich, considering she was writing the handbook on how to be toxic. She left behind a note explaining that she was ashamed of me and couldn't live with someone who would abandon a pregnant woman in her time of need. The note was sitting on the kitchen counter when I got home from work, right next to the divorce papers that apparently had been prepared weeks in advance. Because nothing says, "I want to work on our marriage," like having legal documents ready to go at a moment's notice. I read through the papers while eating leftover Chinese takeout, and I have to admit, they were pretty standard stuff. Bianca wasn't asking for alimony, probably because she knew I'd fight that tooth and nail, and she wasn't trying to claim any ownership of the house we'd bought together. She just wanted out, and honestly, that was fine by me. I signed those papers without hesitation, like I was autographing a baseball for a kid. No tears, no second thoughts, no dramatic speeches about how we could work things out. Just my signature on the dotted line, officially ending 6 years of marriage to a woman who tried to steal my inheritance and then blamed me when her criminal scheme backfired. The next few weeks were strangely peaceful. I'd forgotten what it was like to come home to a house that wasn't filled with passive-aggressive tension and the constant threat of emotional manipulation. I could watch TV without having to negotiate what show we'd watch. I could eat dinner without having to listen to complaints about my cooking, my eating habits, or my general existence. I could exist in my own space without feeling like I was constantly being judged and found wanting. Meanwhile, Harvey had taken my advice and installed additional security measures at the Pine Hollow property. Motion-activated floodlights, upgraded cameras, and what he described as enough electronic surveillance to make the Pentagon jealous. He'd also had a frank conversation with the local sheriff's department about potential trespassing issues, so if anyone else decided to take another midnight stroll around his property, they'd be dealing with more than just an understanding retired cop. But the real entertainment came through Aunt Cheryl, Bianca's only family member who'd maintained any semblance of sanity throughout this entire clusterfuck. Cheryl was the kind of woman who called bullshit when she saw it, regardless of whose feelings got hurt, and she'd been watching her niece's behavior with growing disgust. "They're broke," Cheryl told me during one of our occasional phone calls. We'd stayed in touch because she was one of the few people in Bianca's family who understood that I wasn't the villain in this story. Maya and Logan maxed out 3 credit cards trying to furnish that apartment they thought they were getting. When that fell through, they couldn't afford to live on their own. "What about Logan's music career?" I asked, though we both knew the answer to that question. Cheryl snorted. "Logan's music career consists of playing covers at a sports bar on Thursday nights for tips. Last week he made $37 and spent it on guitar strings." The financial picture she painted was even worse than I'd imagined. Maya's pregnancy had been complicated, requiring several expensive hospital visits that their minimal insurance didn't cover. Logan had been fired from his day job at a record store for showing up late too many times. They'd burned through their savings, such as it was, and now they were living in Bianca's childhood bedroom while her parents struggled to cover the additional expenses. "Your ex-in-laws are drowning," Cheryl continued. "They took out a second mortgage to pay for Maya's medical bills, and now they're talking about selling their house and moving into a smaller place." For a moment, I felt a twinge of something that might have been guilt. These were real people with real problems, and their lives were genuinely difficult. Maya was going to have a baby, Logan was trying to support his family, and Bianca's parents were sacrificing their retirement security to help their daughter. But then I remembered the forged documents, the attempted fraud, the break-in, the lies and manipulation and emotional blackmail. I remembered how Bianca had looked me in the eye and told me she could sign for me, how she'd planned to steal the last piece of my father I had left. "That's unfortunate," I told Cheryl, "but it's not my problem." And for the first time in months, I actually meant it. It's been 6 months since I signed those divorce papers, and for the first time in years, I can actually breathe. You know how they say you don't realize how much something weighs until you put it down? That's exactly what getting rid of Bianca felt like. Suddenly I could stand up straight again without this constant weight pressing down on my shoulders. Living alone turned out to be fucking fantastic. I'd forgotten what it was like to come home to a house that stayed exactly the way I left it, where nobody moved my stuff or complained about my habits or tried to guilt me into caring about problems that weren't mine. I could leave dishes in the sink overnight without getting a lecture about responsibility. I could watch whatever I wanted on TV without having to negotiate through 17 streaming services. I could eat cereal for dinner if I felt like it, and nobody was there to judge my life choices. The first thing I did with my newfound freedom was buy myself a used Mazda SUV. Nothing crazy fancy, but it was mine, paid for with money from Dad's house, and it ran like a dream. Every time I got behind the wheel, I felt like I was driving away from the past and toward something better. No car payments, no arguments about whether we could afford basic transportation, just me and the open road and the satisfaction of owning something outright. Then I did something I probably should have done years ago. I started therapy. Dr. Harrell came recommended by my insurance plan, and she turned out to be exactly what I needed. A straight-talking woman in her 50s who didn't sugarcoat anything and had zero patience for people who wanted to wallow in their problems without doing anything about them. "What happened to you?" she told me during our 3rd session, "has a name. It's called emotional and financial abuse." I'd never thought about it in those terms before, but when she laid it out like that, the pattern became crystal clear. The constant guilt trips, the manipulation, the attempts to control my finances and my property, the way Bianca had made me feel like I was selfish for wanting to protect my father's memory. It was all textbook abusive behavior. "Your ex-wife systematically undermined your confidence and your autonomy," Dr. Harrell explained. "She made you doubt your own judgment and feel guilty for having boundaries. That's not marriage, Julian. That's psychological warfare. Having a professional tell me that I wasn't crazy, that my feelings were valid, that I'd been right to protect myself. It was like getting permission to stop apologizing for my own existence. For years, I'd been second-guessing every decision, wondering if maybe I was being too rigid or too selfish or too unwilling to compromise. Turns out, the problem wasn't that I had boundaries. The problem was that I'd married someone who saw my boundaries as obstacles to overcome. My house became my sanctuary. I painted the bedroom a color I actually liked, bought furniture that was comfortable instead of stylish, and set up a home office where I could work in peace. Every room reflected my choices, my preferences, my vision of what a home should be. It sounds simple, but when you've spent years living in someone else's idea of domestic perfection, having control over your own space feels revolutionary. Meanwhile, the updates from Aunt Cheryl painted a picture of ongoing chaos in the Rodriguez household. Maya's baby had been born healthy, which was genuinely good news, but Logan had apparently decided that fatherhood wasn't for him and had disappeared into the night like a deadbeat vampire. One day he was there, the next day he was gone, leaving behind nothing but a note about needing to find himself and a maxed-out credit card. Maya was now a single mother living with her parents, who were struggling to make ends meet while supporting their daughter and grandchild. Bianca had moved back in too, unable to afford her own place after the divorce, so 3 generations of Rodriguez women were crammed into a house that was already mortgaged to the hilt. They're all blaming each other, Cheryl told me during one of our check-ins. Maya blames Bianca for convincing her she'd get a free house. Bianca blames you for being selfish. Their parents blame everyone for the financial mess they're in. It was like watching a slow-motion car crash from a safe distance. I felt bad for them. The way you feel bad when you see people make spectacularly poor decisions and then act surprised when those decisions have consequences. But I didn't feel responsible for their problems anymore, and that was the biggest victory of all. I've started looking at small cottages outside the city, places with gardens and enough space to breathe. Nothing fancy, just somewhere quiet where I can plant vegetables and maybe get a dog. Somewhere my father would have smiled at, somewhere that honors his memory without being haunted by it. The money from his house made all of this possible. My freedom, my peace, my future. Dad always said that someday the place would mean something to me, and he was right. It meant everything, but not in the way either of us expected. They tried to take everything from me, my inheritance, my peace of mind, my sense of self-worth. But I took it all back, quietly, completely, and now I'm building something new on the foundation of what I protected. That's what real victory looks like.